Hi, my name is Gabby. I'm an oil painter, and I have some useful tips on painting a couple things, pine trees and palm trees, and we're going to do both today. The pine trees we'll start with first, and we're going to do that instead of with a fan brush, with a filbert brush. And if you've never done this before, you might find it's a lot easier than trying to use a fan brush. When we do our palm trees, we'll be using a fan brush for that. So stay tuned, and I hope you learned something great. Okay, so in order to make pine trees, we are going to use a filbert brush. Now, a filbert brush is round on the top and flat. And this works really, really well. This specific filbert brush is called the Royal and Langnickel Zen brush. They're great. They do tend to fall apart, but they work really well. So, to do our pine trees, we're going to do something that I call the plop and wiggle. So I'm going to show you this on this first. We take our brush when we apply it to our canvas, we plop it on there, and then we wiggle the brush. It's super, super simple. If you want your bristles to go down, you plop and move downwards. And then when you want your branches to go up, you're going to plop and go upwards. So plop and wiggle. We do not want to do any sliding either direction. This is all about getting a good brush stroke. So plop and wiggle, plop and wiggle, plop and wiggle. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to start making a pine tree. Quite simple. We start by making a little top piece for the top of our tree, and then we just take our brush and we plop it on the canvas and we wiggle it. Now this pine tree is going to go upwards, so we're going to get going. Now I'm going to show you the beginning of this tree going right, and then after that we're going to kind of mess it up so you can see what you don't want to do. So you just keep on plopping and wiggling and slowly moving your brush just a little bit every time. And then I usually kind of peek up, and then I come back down, and then I peek up, and I come back down. Sometimes I'll come down a couple times, and I'll leave like a chunk over here open, because trees never grow perfect. You should never try to make your tree look perfect. It will look a lot less natural if it's more perfect. So, on our way down this tree, there's a couple mistakes that people tend to make. Anytime, and no matter what kind of brush they're using, they will take the idea of making a Z tree quite literally, and without really connecting their plop and wiggles, they will end up with a tree that looks like this. And then you almost have to go back across and do that to fill it in, but still it ends up looking really empty. So then it's easy to go, oh, I need to fill in this spot. Let me go back up here and fill this. Go back up. You never want to go from the bottom of the tree up. You always want to go from the top of the tree down. Otherwise your branches end up in places they don't belong. So another issue that I find that people do often is they will make their tree, this is kind of two trees, and they will decide that it needs to be fuller. And then you end up with a tree that is essentially choking itself out. And you don't want to do that. Let's do a tree where we go with the branches going downwards. So we'll again start with the top, and I just put the tiniest bit of pressure. And like if you try to turn it, which is what I tried to do to show you guys this, you'll end up with a bigger spot. The best thing to do is go straight on, and then just make your pressure harder as you come down. Really important here that you keep your brush level. It's really easy to turn your brush when you're doing this. You want to keep your brush completely horizontal this direction. You don't want to be tipping your brush at all. Now, how do you practice this before you actually put your paintbrush to canvas? Well, I'm happy you asked. The best thing for you to do is to take a regular piece of paper, not a canvas, just a blank piece of paper, and your paintbrush, and some really cheap acrylic paint like craft paint, and practice this over and over and over again on your piece of paper with your craft paint, and figure out how to make that tree. You will save yourself a lot of time and a lot of heartache if you get it figured out before you actually hit your canvas. So one more quick review on this before we go on to palm trees. We always put a tip on our tree. We start at the top, little pressure, and we plop it and we wiggle it. Plop and wiggle. You don't want to just plop. You don't want to just go straight across. You don't want to make just a Z. You don't want to tilt your brush. And you don't want to work your way back up the tree. You want to start very gentle, and then as you go down, the pressure gets higher. I go down and up, and down and up, and down and up, and down and up. And each one of your little plops should overlap and overlap and overlap so that it's thick, but it's not too thick. Okay, so now we'll move on to palm trees. Palm trees can either be sort of bushy, as this is how they really grow, and this is just their trunk, of course, or they can be nice and smooth. If they're smooth, then they're shaved palm trees, which is what most of the palm trees you see are. So we're going to make a palm tree, and with this very nice fan brush, you just sort of lay down your brush on the canvas. And right now we're just making the spines, like the branches of the palm tree leaves. I don't always put the lines in first, but it does help. Again, we don't want our trees to look anything like perfect, because most trees just aren't perfect, and they look a lot more natural, especially in a painting, if you don't attempt to make them look like they're perfect. So we're going to take this. Now this is like a feather off of the canvas technique. We don't want to slide our brush and then stop and pick it up. We want to sweep it off. So let's start up here. I start from the inside and I just gently sweep. Now if you're ever doing this and you're finding that you're not getting much paint off, then it means that your paint is too thick and you need to thin it out. This is one of those things that you just need to have a well-thinned paint to do. When I thin my paint, I use Gamsol or linseed oil. Gamsol is a paint thinner. It's the only paint thinner I will use. It's not nearly as flammable and it doesn't have any scent. It is expensive, but it's totally worth it. Now with that one, I kind of stopped, and it shows you what happens when you do that. You want to make sure that you feather off. If you want to put in, say, a piece that looks like it's further back, you do it just more gently. And smaller, and then it'll push that back as though it's going backwards. On this other trunk, I'm going to show you really quickly just a technique for making it look like it's windy. So we're going to have our wind coming from this general direction, and we're going to end up kind of covering up this other tree. So we will put in some branches. And then by leaving that one side kind of bald and open and curling the rest of our branches this general direction, it'll give you that look as though it's being windswept. I suggest that you don't put in too many branches on a palm tree, because just like your pine trees, you can kind of clog them up and then they end up looking like a big blob instead of a nice, pretty feathery palm tree. So that's my quick, simple way of how to make pine trees and palm trees. Always remember, pine trees, you do the plop and wiggle, and with the palm trees, it's a nice sweep. Consider buying brushes, especially like the Royal Langnickel that I was talking about, Zen. They do all the work for you. They're wonderful. And again, the Artist's Loft Sorrento. They work wonderful for oil. You can practice this with acrylic. You can also do this with acrylic painting. I hope that this has helped you. I look forward to seeing you another time with another lesson. From now, this is Gabby. Happy painting!